Welcome to another edition of the Sim Racing Garage. I'm Barry Rowland, and in this episode, we'll be reviewing the Fanatec CSS 1.5 shifter. Now, I've been looking at this shifter online for a while now, and was always curious on how they managed to create both an H-pattern shifter and a sequential shifter in one package. So now we can find out. So let's get to it. So now let's take a look at what you get when you order a Fanatec shifter. First, we get this big box shifter, and it is rather large, as you can see. And this means you'll have to, well, consider where you're going to be mounting it in your cockpit, because it does take up a bit of room. Now, it's really not that much larger than the Thrustmaster shifter is when you look at the whole package of it. So, but it's just got this square boxiness to it, and the Thrustmaster has that cone shape that actually takes up less space as it goes down to the bottom. So just something you got to consider when you're going to be mounting this, where you'll be mounting it. And we'll talk about where I'm going to be mounting it and what I'm going to use to do that once we get to that segment of the video. Now let's take a closer look over here. See what we got. All right, we've got the usual Fanatec branding and labeling. And these little tabs over here that you see, they are feet, but they are also tabs that are removed when we're going to put our shifting nuts in here, and we'll see those in a minute too. Again, we got some cooling fins, it looks like, all the way around in case you heat up this box from aggressive shifting. We have the selector from, it has it labeled there, from sequential to 8-speed. Currently we're in the 8-speed setting, and you can move it over here to sequential. Now, moving it over here reminds me of something I wanted to mention when I was showing you this shifter, is the ribs here, or the fins, where they've cut these out for the rounded position to clear the switch access, are very sharp. They didn't finish these before they coated it. And all the rest of the fins areas, if you feel them anywhere, they're not like that. They're not sharp at all. So, yeah, I found that out by actually using the switch and scraped my finger across one of them. And at first I thought I cut my finger, but I didn't. And I thought, geez, you know, these things are pretty sharp. They're like the sharp edges of metal. What really reminds me of it is when I'm working on a car and I'm under the dash and I'm trying to do some wiring there or something like that. And all of that metal under the dash is the same way. It's just stamped out metal. They don't take the time or make an effort to sand that or file that down so it won't cut you when you're underneath. Of course, they don't care what happens to the poor mechanics when they're in there working on the car. But anyway, just something to be mindful of, and maybe it's just on my sample, but yeah, that's really sharp edges down there. It's not going to show up on the video. I can get pretty close here, but you're just not going to be able to see it. But they finished the edges on all the other stuff, so yeah, that's just kind of an oversight there, I think. Right, up here we see the tensioner adjustment, and that's a 5mm set screw in there. At least I'm assuming that's a set screw, and we'll get to that in a second. What else we want to see in here? Of course, can't go by the RJ12 port without showing that. And of course, that's how we're going to connect it to the motor base, if that's how you're connecting it, or using the USB dongle to connect it to a PC. Right. Anything else we want to see? Nice silk printing, as usual, from Fanatec. That is their usual fare. They do a really good job with this kind of stuff. And of course, we see the 2, 4, 6 on the bottom, and we've got reverse 1, 3, 5, and 7. Yes, we got a 7th gear over there. Now, I don't usually drive any cars with 7th gear, but maybe Truck Simulator or something like that has them. But probably a car somewhere that has a 7th gear in it. But most of the ones I drive are 6, 5, and even 4, like a Shelby Cobra or something like that, but not 7. Now, when you're shifting this thing, and I've got it set up pretty heavy right now, so let's go ahead and adjust that light so I don't have to hold it down. I like my shifting friction to be kind of heavy, but I'm just going to turn this, and this, again, the 5mm hex in there, easy enough to get to. And then we can loosen it up a bit. We're also in sequential, so let's put it back down there. There we go. And actually, when you go from, another thing of note here is, when we go from, you can see how easy it is to move this. And I got it really loose, of course. But when I put it in sequential mode, because of the way this grid or bracket in here slides forward, you can see that it will, well, you saw it come forward when I did that. But yeah, it's a lot more tension on it in sequential mode, even though we didn't change the tension on the tensioner over here. So it has to be something going on with the mechanism inside it. Once we slide it in sequential mode, it's a stronger spring to begin with, and we can make that very strong or hard to manipulate, if you will. So when I like to do the sequential, you can do it with one finger, but it's got some movement or wiggle in there that if you do it with both of them, it goes very smoothly on both sides because you're applying equal pressure on that bracket or whatever it is in there, that grid with slots in it, and it goes very easily. But if you do it with one finger, it kind of wants to twist it internally and doesn't go as easily. In fact, it won't even go there. You know, on this side it did go. Okay, right. Just another observation on the overall package here. Now, the shifter knobs are very nice, actually. I really like these. And for an H pattern, I love the round ball type shifter. And that is because when you're shifting in an H pattern, you're actually trying to guide it somewhere. And when you're comparing it to shifting in a sequential, like using this handle, I'll throw that one on there. There we go. If we're in sequential mode, let's put it in there. Oh, we were there. Then all you're really doing is slapping this handle forward and backwards. So that's a nice fat handle, actually, to use when you're actually doing your sequential, because we're just popping it and jerking it back, so you're really not trying to guide it anywhere. So it's a good surface area. It's got a lot of good surface area there just to hit it in the palm of your hand or grab it with the cup of your fingers there when you're downshifting and upshifting. So, or upshifting would be forward, and, well, no, downshifting would be forward, upshifting would be back. But when you're doing an H pattern, it's nice to have something like this on here. And this is actually pretty substantial. This is 194 grams for the round one, which is heavier by actually a considerable amount than the sequential knob. This one, as soon as you pick them up, you can tell that this one is substantially heavier. And it makes shifting easier and more positive, I want to say. Good tactile feedback when you're using this on an H pattern. Even in sequential, if you just want to use it in sequential too, it works that way, obviously. But this is lighter. And how much lighter? This is 194 grams. This is 140 grams. So that's a 50-gram difference between these two knobs. And you can feel it right away. And you can feel it when you're actually having it on the shifter and using it. And I prefer a heavier shifter knob on my shifters because that's just the way I've always had it in my cars. And it just feels better when I'm using something like that. I've actually got a 465 gram stainless steel chrome plated ball that goes on my Pro Sim Quaife H pattern shifter. But that's a beast to shift anyway when you have it high tension on it, and it really makes a big difference when you have a heavier piece of knob on there. Right. So, and by the way, while we're at the knob part, you can actually put any universal knob you want on here as long as they have an adapter that will fit a 12 millimeter, because that's what this is, a 12 millimeter thread, or M12, and it's a 1.5 pitch. And you can get an adapter that goes on here if a shifter knob that you want requires it. So, or you get one of those universals that have the nylon sleeves or tubes that go on top, and then they fit on top like this, and you tighten up some Allen set screws, and then it's got like a beauty ring that comes up or something. That would work also. So you do have options when it comes to getting different shifter handles on. I'm going to leave this one on because I like the heavier stuff, as I said before. My other one doesn't roll away from me. Okay, so anything else we want to see here? Well, I guess that's it. We'll see more, of course, once we pop this baby open and take a look inside, because I'm very curious to see how they're doing this and how they're shifting back and forth. I can kind of imagine what's going on, but when it comes to the H pattern shifting, I'm really curious to how they've got that as far as making that H pattern shift and feeling those gates and grooves that you can feel in this when you actually shift it. Right, so let's get to the rest of the stuff you get in this kit. First off, we get some cables, obviously. And these are RJ12 cables, and of course they're going to plug into the front of our shifter here. We got a longer one, which would probably be for when you're running USB maybe, or obviously if it depends on where you mount your motor or your base. And then we've got one over here, and I'll show you this close up. This has got one of those PS2 type connectors in it. It's got the 6 pins in it over to an RJ12. So this would be, I guess depending on the base you have, some of the older bases might have that one, but this is awful short. And you'd have to have your shifter very close. So on a lot of cockpits, your base is going to be a bit further away from your shifter. So it depends on your cockpit what wires you're going to be able to use and if these are long enough or not. And if not, you'll have to come up with some kind of extension solution. Right. Anything else we want to talk about? And this is just another RJ12. It's just a flat one. Let's talk about mounting. And we're going to get to mounting after we have a look inside, because we're going to mount it up to the cockpit that I have. And once again, like I mentioned before, I'm going to go over here to the other camera to show you this. These little babies come off, okay? And once these are off, you have access to these slots. So it's very similar, actually, to 80/20 profile, if you've ever worked with any of that. And here's the nut that goes in, set you aside. And actually kind of resembles the 80/20 profile nut. You can see the raised section in the middle here. And that's what's going to stick out between these grooves. And we have the lips, obviously, they're going to catch the inside of those grooves. It comes with 5mm screws, and they're actually kind of a darkish color, gunmetal maybe, or something like that. And of course, they just fit right in there. And you just drill some holes in whatever you're going to mount it to, and then go ahead and put your screws through. Now, these are only about, they look like they're about 10mm, so you might have to source some longer ones depending on your mounting situation. You know, when it comes to mounting, everybody's situation is different, so I just kind of show what I do and what I have on hand for as far as options go. But yeah, it seems like everybody's going to have a little bit different way to have to mount theirs. Right. So, what else we got? That's it. No, wait a minute. Well, no, that is all you get. You can get this, and you have to get this if you're going to use this shifter with a PC. And this, of course, is the Fanatec USB dongle. We'll take a closer look at that. And for a mere extra $20, you can have one of your very own. Not much here. Again, the usual Fanatec labeling. Of course, we'll crack this baby open to see what kind of a USB conversion board they're using, because that's all that's going on here. It's a little board, PCB board, that I'm sure that Fanatec has made up to their own specifications. We've got a USB-A plug on the side, or on the other side, nothing big there. And of course, the RJ12 goes in there. The way I'm mounting my shifter, I'm going to need some kind of extension, and I do have USB extensions, so I'll be okay, because this is obviously it's going to be very short trying to plug this in my computer and then plug the other end of that RJ12 that comes with the shifter into my computer, because it's a bit away as far as distance from where my shifter is going to be mounted. All right, so again, this does not come with a shifter, and if you use it with PC, you're going to have this, 20 extra bucks. So yeah. Shifter's already $200 plus shipping. That's like $216, $217 for shipping. Plus we threw in another 20 bucks for this. So I would like to see this thrown in with the shifter. It's just one of the way that they do this is, and I understand what they're saying when they say, oh well, a lot of people are going to get this shifter and they're going to stay within the Fanatec ecosystem, if you will, which means that they'll only be using the Fanatec base with the shifter, and they'll always be plugging it in to their base, so they really don't need this. This is something extra that they don't have to charge those users. But yeah, I think it would go a long ways for goodwill if they would just throw these in with the shifter, because there's a heck of a lot of people I know that use this USB dongle and have to buy it. Another 20 bucks is another 20 bucks. But anyway, that said, I paid my 20 bucks and got my dongle, because I'll be using it on a PC. All right, enough of that. So what we'll do next is actually crack this stuff open and take a look at it. So now we're going to take a look inside. We'll do the USB dongle first, and then we'll get to the shifter over here. And this is, if you saw in the closer look segment, is just a couple of Phillips screws in here. And there'll be those coarse threaded plastic screws, similar to like a wood screw, and hopefully there's no glue or anything holding this together. So let's get this one out, and we'll get the second one out. Bear with. There you go. All right, so I think the bottom will just, it's kind of just falling off there. See, it comes right off. And there's the board. Doesn't show us much because, well, that's the back of the board. So we should be able to take this out pretty easily, unless there's some kind of funky attachment system they're using here. Obviously, we don't want to pull it by the wires over here. We want to do something a little different. So what I try to do is pry up on the boards. Now you'll see there's these little pieces here that have the slots in them. And that's typically for attaching something to the board. When I see something like that, there's two things that can be going on here. That is, something's attached to this board, or they're using these to hold the board to the rest of this housing. So what I usually do is just take a flathead screwdriver and very carefully go on one side of the circuit board. And you have to be careful doing this. You don't want to chip the circuit board, or you don't want to cut any of the circuits on here, these little traces, if you will. Just very gently. There we go. See, it popped right up there. And then I'll go to the other side and do the same thing. Kind of work it a little bit just to get it to come out. And it looks like it's actually coming out very easily. Bonus. So I'll just kind of turn it upside down. There we go. All right. So here's the other side. And actually, these are actually holding this RJ12 housing on here that is actually attached by the solder points on the bottom here. Let me give you a little pointer. So attached there. So obviously there's traces through the circuit board that are attaching these to other goodies. Now, look at the business side of it. We see, first thing, there's a header right here. I'm not sure what that would be for. So apparently this board has other functions available to it. Maybe we could add something else like the pedals to this before we go to USB. I don't know. And of course it has the header here. There's actually the USB header. It's going over to our USB-A plug. So we've got your little quartz clock here. That's usually what those are. We've got an integrated circuit here. And that is, let's go ahead and just hold it still so you guys get a look at it. Integrated circuit's actually doing the firmware bit. So that's the firmware in there, controlling how these signals are coming into the RJ12 here, and then converting it to what USB can use, and coming back out our wires here. And we see the usual 4 wires in a USB plug. You've got your black, green, white, and red. And also, which is a bonus here, which I like what I'm seeing, is the shielding, the aluminum shielding, the braid that you see on these cables, a USB cable when you cut it open. That is actually a ground that is attached to the housing here. This metal part that goes around the plug is like an extra ground. Also, you have a black wire here that's its own ground, and of course there's a pin inside this plug for that. That will, get some focus here. See little pins in there. One of those is also a ground. So it goes through the circuitry between the plugs as a ground also. But this is an extra bonus here. And in a USB plug, they also have ground to this. So you'll see some things, and actually a lot, that don't use this extra ground. And this helps reduce the EMI interface with the USB cable when you use that shielding as a spare ground, if you have that facility, which they do, obviously, on your board. Right. So that's a little point of interest for you guys that are in electronics. I don't know just enough about this stuff to get myself in trouble. Right. So not much else to see here. That's what you get for your $20. So yeah, I'm feeling a little less bad about it now that I see everything that's going on here. So what we'll do is obviously put this back together and be careful not to create any static electricity. And that's why you see this little blue pad here that I use. This is actually an anti-static pad that is grounded. I always take all the electronic stuff off on that. So what we'll do is put this back in the housing, and then we'll go ahead and get this puppy broken open and see what's inside of here. So now we're going to take a look inside of this shifter and see what it's made of. So we'll twist our shifter handle off. And what we're going to do is open the top first. And those are 3mm screws. The heads on them are actually 3mm. But they're 4mm or M4 type screw threads at a what is it? 0.7 pitch, yeah. So let's go ahead and get these screws off. And they should come off pretty easily. And they do. So make sure we put them in our little magnetic cup over here so that they don't, there you go, you can see it. So they don't get away from us. Bear with me. I want to take a second, or a couple seconds. This is all metal, obviously case. If you watch the beginning of this review, you know that already. Now, of course, anytime we crack and open a case, we want to make sure that we're careful to look for any wires or connectors that might be running like from the bottom or from the side somewhere. We don't want to just yank the top off, and obviously that would be a bad idea to ruin the board if there's something plugged or soldered on somewhere. And if you wiggle this a little bit, there you go, it just kind of pops loose. And okay, we got some wire here, but that's looping back in. Got another one down here though, and that's the one we got to watch for. I'll show you that. See that little black and red wire here. Actually, it's black and red and red. And that's going down to the bottom. But we'll see the bottom in a minute, so there's no sense in trying to look down in there. So what I usually do is if I can't get my fingers on it, which in this case, I guess I can, just kind of wiggle it as I'm pulling down on it, and there you go. It just came right off. So now we can actually pull this whole section off. Pretty cool. I like the way this is put together because this lends itself to easy maintenance procedures if you should ever need to do anything to it, or when you send it back to Fanatec, it's easy for them to fix it. Right, first off, what I see here is, what I like is sealed bearings. How about that? I was a little surprised here when I looked at this and I said, oh my goodness, there's a lot of metal in here. In fact, it's pretty much all metal, which is a great thing, except for this little nylon tip on the end of the shifter that goes into the shifting gate inside, and we'll see that in a minute. But yeah, these are, I believe they're 6,000 Z sealed bearings right there. Now you're not going to be able to read that because it's just not good enough resolution for that, and I got this light shining on it. But anyway, got a bearing here, and of course this bearing is supporting the movement of the shifter back and forth. So when we move it, got a bearing here, and on the other side, of course, we're going to have another bearing just behind the circuit board here. And what else are we going to see here? We've got a bearing in here that's right behind this spring. That's really hard to see, but you can see a little reflection of it there. It's coming out from, whoops, over there. And you'll see the spring. This is what's providing the tension for when we're actually going from side to side, when we're going like this. So when we're selecting a gear up here, going side to side. Now, that spring doesn't look like it's adjustable to me, but I don't think you really want to adjust. But where we adjust the tension is that little hole on the side of the case actually goes into this socket right here. And if we look at how this is working, I hope I can see that you guys can see this. Let me go ahead and push this all the way down to up to the top gear selections. There we go. And right here, where's my pointer? There it is. See if we can get a good look at this. There's an indentation over here, sitting right there. And when we move this down, the cam that's in here that we tighten and loosen, we're actually, by running the screw in and out of this housing here, increases or decreases the pressure as this gets moved. So I can move it without. There, see that? See how it goes into like a little click there? And there's another one right there. So there's only actually three positions. The middle position, the position we're at now, which is 2, 4, 6. The middle position, we move back, and then you can see the notch there, and then of course moving to the front, and we can see the plate again up here. Lots of oil everywhere on this also, which is getting on my pointer, which is a good thing. So that's how the tensioner is working, and that's how we feel the shifter going into either one of these gears on the bottom or on the top gear. That little notch in that plate there is giving us that feeling. Right. So we also have on here some electronic circuit boards, obviously. And if you look right here on this part that moves back and forth, now remember these two pieces of metal or brackets that are holding those bearings are stationary. They don't go anywhere. It's just the middle thing that's rocking back and forth. So when we get centered here, which is where I'm going to show you, for this thing to actually find out which gear we're in, it has a cool Hall effect sensor going on here. And this little bit you see here is actually a magnet. In fact, I could take my little metal pointer here and hang it. So this is a magnet, and you can see it through the hole in the circuit board here. But when we move the lever back or forth, it goes on one side or the other of that circuit board, up and down. And on the circuit board, there's two little circuits integrated here. Up here there's a circuit, and down here there's a circuit. They're creating that Hall effect that this magnet right here affects. So it'll know if I'm in the front gears or the back gears, or if I'm in neutral, because I'm in the hole right there if I'm in neutral. So the magnet's just in between the two, not having an effect on them, in other words. Right, pretty cool. I actually like the way this is working. That means we don't have a wear point or friction point here. It's just magnetic, and again, Hall effects type of setup, which is very good because that means that's one more thing that's not going to wear out on this shifter. The sealed bearings, again, very cool. I imagine they're going to have a very long service time for those seal bearings. So really, I like what I'm seeing here. I'm a little surprised, pleasantly surprised, when I pull this open to see how that works. Now, you'll see there's another circuit board here, and it's doing the same thing that this board is, but in the other direction, because when we're in neutral, we're actually able to move that center shaft right there in the position we want it to be in to go in whichever gear we're actually going to get. But this circuit board is doing the same thing. It's got the same kind of Hall effect sensor because it's actually mounted on the outside of this case. There might be a hole in here. I did not pull the circuit board off to see, because I really didn't think it was necessary, since we already have this one to see what is actually happening. And it's really hard to see down inside of this hollow part and see what's going on up here, but it has to be the same kind of setup, some kind of a magnet that this board can sense when it moves left or right. Okay, so that's how it works. And again, all metal. I like what I mean, it's just, like I said, I'm pleasantly surprised what I'm seeing here. This looks like it's a very robust shifter. Yeah, so far. So now, let's go ahead and pull the bottom off and see how that's working. And it's the same deal on the bottom, except we have a different screw size. Instead of 3, we're going to be looking at 2.5s here. And of course, these are these countersunk flathead screws. Get the right bit here, that would help. And we'll just go ahead and spin those off. And you don't have to take these plastic pieces off that we take to put those little track nuts in, so if you want to mount this on the side or the front. And there's little T-nuts you saw in the previous segment of this video. So we don't have to mess with those, which is a bonus. That's 4 screws we don't have to take off. And just bear with me here so I get these off. They come off pretty quick. Go ahead and slide this over here. Right. I really like the finish all the way around this, except for those little sharp pieces that I said before. I'd like to see those sanded down or milled down before they actually put the coating on these aluminum pieces. But then again, they may do that. It might have just been somebody missed it. Right, so now the point is here, or what I'm trying to do here, is just lift it off the bottom plate. And that looks like that'll happen pretty easily. Okay, there we go. Right, and so there's our housing. Very solid. It's all one piece. It's not bolted together, which adds to the rigid nature of this whole shifter setup. And there's the wire that we saw before that I unplugged. And that wire is going to a little switch over here. And this switch is made to, you can hear it clicking, I think. There you go. I don't know if you can hear that. And that's to let obviously the circuit board on the top over here know what position our slider is in. Are we in the 8-speed position, or are we in the sequential position? Now watch what happens when the sequential position slider is slid back or forth. It's attached to the plate inside here, and you'll see that in a second. But you'll notice these grooves are ramps that are cut in here, and there's a little cam follower on the other side of this little plastic piece that allows this to raise up. Now right now in the position it's in is in the 8-speed, because we see it there, 8-speed. So that means the sequential plate is down low and flat, so that this nylon piece doesn't attach to it at all. In other words, this is too high and it sits down here like this. But it's too high for the sequential to engage it, plate. Which is good, because that makes it the 8-speed transmission. Now when we push these forward or backwards, actually I push them forward, you'll see that 2 things happen. This plate with a little spring in the middle of it you see down there is going to rise up, and we're going to see these 2 other cams come out and actually push that switch down when we do that. So that's what, so you see I push it switch down now. So now the switch gets engaged. So now our circuit board knows that we are now in sequential mode, and because this thing rises up and grabs that nylon tip on the shifter shaft, now it's in between that spring. So that shifter shaft is sitting right down there in the middle there. And now this spring, which is also not adjustable, at least it doesn't look like it is to me, is giving us the friction for the sequential shifter mode. And you'll notice when you have this shifter, I'm sure you guys have already noticed this, when you're in the 8-speed situation here, then what happens is you dial in the friction on that friction grub screw that we saw before, how much friction we want on the shifter, how much resistance. And then when we actually go to sequential, it actually gets harder, because it's got its own spring set up here. So what you normally do, or at least what I do, is I usually go in and reset my friction or how much effort it takes to do the sequential again after I go to the sequential setup. So not a big deal, obviously, but still something to be mindful of that you probably noticed already if you have this shifter. Now, you also notice in this gate here, they are cammed, or they've got some little rolling edges on them, so they're just not straight gauges, or rather edges on the gates. So and that's to help guide that nylon shifter back and forth as we're shifting it in the different gears that we're using. So yeah, very nice setup here. Again, all steel and aluminum, obviously, and of course these pieces here, the screws, of course, are real steel. And the only thing plastic here is these little attachments here, the plastic ones that we push back and forth to raise or lower, and we can see the raising and lower also from this angle pretty good. You see it's in the sequential mode, and we bring it back down, it just kind of lowers it down, just like that. And this is really the only vulnerable part I see, is this plastic piece here, and I don't think that's really vulnerable because once you put the case back together, it's riding in a channel, so it doesn't take a lot of pressure. But this is one of the reasons why, you know, when it's open like this, you can see that if you just use one finger, if you're doing this and it's all assembled, you'll notice there's a lot more resistance than if we just put two fingers on both sides of the case and slide it back and forth. That's because we're equalizing the pressure on each side, and when you just use one finger, you're kind of binding that it wants to twist on you. So it's easier, much easier when we use two to do it with. Right. And of course we're going up and down. Pretty cool, actually. You know, the way I see this set up, it looks like it's something that's going to last a long time. You can be banging on it forever. And maybe a circuit board will go bad, but I don't see this stuff going bad. Maybe the only thing I see as far as a vulnerable part might be these plastic tabs here, or the actual nylon bushing that they have on the bottom of the shaft itself. But you'll see that there's actually a little screw there, so it looks like it's going to be very easy to replace this if it wears out, or when it wears out. But you can see they put a lot of grease on this, so it's going to make it wear a lot easier as long as there's a lot of grease on there like that. Right, so anything else we want to see? I think that's about it. It's pretty simple looking setup here. Simple is good though, and it looks like a very robust design. And like I said before, when I opened it up, I said, oh my goodness, I said, you know what, I like what I'm seeing here, and I did not expect that. Some of the other Fanatec stuff I've had over the years, I've opened it up and it just wasn't built like this. I mean, sealed bearings and, you know, all these thick aluminum plates. Yeah, this is really, really nice. I like what I'm seeing. Right, so what we'll do now is put everything back together and do the usual driving of the shifter in the rather not the sim experience. We don't have that anymore. We're going to do it in the P1 rig with the D-box and go ahead and do some heel and toe with the H pattern shifter setup and use the sequential also and see how that goes. Now let's talk about some of the different options we have as far as mounting our shifter to our cockpits or our desk, if that's where you're going to be using it at. First, we'll talk about what comes with the shifter when you order it, and that's these little T-nut looking guys with some screws. Let me get a little closer look over here. And I actually showed these in the closer look, but in case you didn't see that, you can see these things are a lot like T-nuts that work in 80/20 profiles, because really the fins or the grooves over here between the fins are a lot like that. And then we have these M5 cap screws, socket head cap screws, and they're a 4mm on the top for when you want to tighten them down. And these are going to slide into the channels here, and this will give us a mount point to where we can actually screw the shifter onto. Let's say if I was going to be mounting it on a side plate, then I would have to have holes in that side plate so I could actually screw into these T-nuts once I have them in the grooves. Or I could put it over here. I really like the mounting options on this shifter because you can pretty much mount from any direction that you want to because of this system. Very, very nice. I like the system they use for mounting this. And we can also mount from the bottom, but we don't use these. I'll show you that over here. There's 4 holes here that are actually M6 screw threads in them. So you would have to source some M6 screws to be able to mount this. Now, if you take a look here, you can see that Fanatec offers their own desk mount shifter, or shifter mount rather, and it has places to mount on. You can mount it on the bottom. We're using those 6mm screws. Of course, you can use the little T-nut deals and mount it on the front also, but that's a separate thing that you have to buy. and that doesn't come with this setup. So that's another thing that you have to buy as an accessory if you want to mount to a desk. Right. So easy enough, and what we're going to do is go ahead and show you real quick how this works. Very simple. I'm going to use my trusty Huddy driver, and these are 2 mil. Get over here closer. These little guys here are 2 mils. So what we're going to do is pull one of these off and see how the system works. I just pull this one off. Easy enough. They're a flathead screw, which means there is a counter bore or little recess bevel section in here rather. You can see that. So these little flathead screws fit in and they go flush. Cool. Right, so once you have that off, then we're just going to take one of these washers, or 2 of these washers in this case, because if we were going to be mounting it, we wouldn't want to just mount it with 1 nut, especially when you have an option of mounting with 2. And it's a very simple issue of just sliding this in there and sliding the other one in there. Get it slide in there. Very nice tight fit. I like that. Now these are free roaming, so they will slide around on you, and that is just going to add a little bit extra to the complication of mounting it, but I'm sure anybody can handle that. It's just I'm used to using these spring ball nuts on my 80/20, and of course they can slide off and go crazy on you too. Anyway, they're spring ball ones, so when you put it in, it doesn't go anywhere. But simple enough, as you can see how that's working. And then of course we would mount it using our screws. I'm going to go ahead and put this back on because I am not going to be using this system to mount my shifter, because I have a P1 cockpit from SimLabs. Get this go in there. And SimLabs obviously has their own solution. Take a look at that for mounting this shifter. Now this is the one they've had for a while. Nice flat piece of aluminum. I'll show you close up here. And you can mount these anywhere you want to, obviously, and then we can rotate the shifter body and get it exactly where we need it to be. We can mount it, typically I'll be mounting it like this or like this, because if you try to mount it sideways, let's say my profile is my hand, and I want to mount it sideways on that, I'd have to have a profile that was a 40-160 to line up with these sensors here. That's pretty wide, in other words. So typically we'll be mounting it just on like the top rail and then have the shifter sitting up here. Depending on which side of the rail you want to go, it really doesn't matter. And of course this will bolt on like that once we have these nuts in here. And then of course we can actually cant the shifter body, which is very cool, any way we want to. Or we can have it sitting flat like this and then mount to our profile that way, or vice versa, spin it around if you want the shifter closer to you and you have the room. And that's what it's all about when you're mounting this shifter. It's all about what's right for your cockpit or what's right for whatever you're driving in. And I can use this, but actually SimLabs has something new, and I like this even better. This is a plate that has this little L on it, and it has a diagonal groove in it that's going to fit into the channel of the 80/20 profile we mount this to. Get a closer look over here. And this mounts directly to the bottom. So we would mount this with 6mm screws on the bottom like this, and then we could just set it down on the profile and bolt it to the profile, and then we can actually, with the way this is slanted, we can actually cant this back and forth a little bit. So similar to what we can do on the other bracket, but this is a lot more compact, and it sits directly under. Plus it allows me to get the shifter closer to the mounting point. See, on this other one, the mounting point to your 80/20 profile is pretty far from the shifter. And that's okay if you've got the room. I don't have the room on this P1 with my seat being where it is, and like so many out there, you're going to have so many different situations when you're mounting this stuff that you're just going to have to figure out your own way forward. But this is going to be great, I think, and what we're going to do next is go ahead and mount this to the shifter, and then we'll get it on the profile and see how that looks. Right, so now we've got the shifter mounted to our 80/20 profile, and it's kind of got a lean back angle on it, looks really good. We'll kind of go around the side here and try to show you how it's got that angle on it. and I've already sat in it and went through the gears, and it works really good. So I'm really happy with this angle, and what I can do here is just go ahead and go around to the other side, and you'll see where I actually mounted the bolts, and I'm using 6mm bolts for this, into the channels, and you can see how that slanted slot now is kind of level, and that's what kicks the shifter back. Right, so all I got to do now is get in the cockpit and take it for a ride. Alright, so here we are in iRacing at Sebring. We're in the Audi 90 GTO for testing the H-pattern functions of this shifter. And I like the Audi 90 GTO for testing H-patterns because it's a very difficult car to shift smoothly. You have to take your time with the clutch pedal on the upshifts, but not on the downshifts. And if you go too fast with the clutch pedal and just slam it real quick and let go, then chances are you're going to miss the gear. Or if you over rev it, you'll miss the gear. So it is a challenging car to drive, and of course it is an H-pattern shifter. First thing I noticed about this shifter is, well, how well it shifts. From going from the 1, 2, 3 going upwards and back, it really shifts a lot more crisper than I would imagined it would have. But I have to admit, after we did the look inside segment of this video and I saw how the shifter gate, the internal shifter gate, is shaped and how they've curved or ramped the ends of those gates to facilitate an easier shift, then it kind of all came together and made sense when I was using it. Really like using this. It's all metal inside pretty much, except for the nylon guide that is on the end of the shifter shaft, and it does a great job finding the gate slots, and really you know what gear you're in when you're shifting. I'm a bit surprised at how well this shifts and works, and I can see why so many people like this shifter now. It really does a great job. And if it was the only H-pattern shifter I had to use, then I think I would be happy with it, to be honest with you. It does a good job. I like the weight of the round knob, and of course I'm particular to round knobs. I know some people actually use the long shifting handle on the H-pattern shifter function also, but I like the round knob because it is substantially heavier, and it makes those shifts feel a little bit more crisp, and it gives you a little more tactile feedback rather, when you make your shifts. So that's, again, it all came together as a package as far as this H shifter. So yeah, I can recommend it if you're looking for an H shifter. Now what we're going to do next is get into the Corvette, a C6R I believe, and we're going to stay at Sebring. And this is going to be a sequential shifter. First thing I noticed about the sequential shifter was, when I went to the sequential mode, it was pretty tight, because I had it pretty tight for the H pattern. And if you saw, again, the look inside video or segment of this video, you would have seen that there's another spring that comes up and goes up against the bottom of the shifter lever where that nylon piece is. So that adds to the existing friction that you have on the side of that friction block, if you saw the look inside. So I had to loosen the friction amount, and then it all came back together and it felt pretty good. And it springs back pretty well to the center. And I put the long, as you can see, I put the long handle back on here for the sequential duties. And to be honest, it's not as a good sequential shifter as it is an H-pattern shifter, to me anyway. I really like the H-pattern shifter function on this. I could live with that if that was, like I said before, if that was the only one I had. The sequential feels a little bit more, how do I want to put it, I guess numb or vague. I mean, it does shift, it does what it's supposed to do, it gets the job done. I didn't miss any shifts. It just didn't feel the same as when I was using the H-pattern shifter. Now I actually don't show that here, but I actually put the ball back on instead of the long lever, and the extra weight of the ball knob actually made it feel a little bit better for me. So if you guys haven't tried that, you want to try that. But it just felt too light, I guess, is what I'm trying to say, and I wasn't getting the tactile feedback that I was getting when I was using H-pattern mode. Right, but overall, yeah, this is a great shifter. I don't see anybody having a problem with this shifter, especially the way it's built and the way it performs so far. Man, I'm real happy with it. So yeah, that's the end of the driving. We'll just finish out Sebring here a little bit and get on to final thoughts. Final thoughts on the CSS 1.5 shifter. Before I actually bought my shifter, I had heard mostly good things about it, and one of the reasons why I wanted to do an SRG review on it. First, the build quality on the shifter is much better than I had anticipated. When we did the look inside segment of this review, I was pleasantly surprised. I like the fact that they're using sealed bearings for the pivot points on this assembly. They give this shifter a smooth quality when you're actually shifting. I also like that they're using metal throughout the shifter. It should make for a durable, long-lasting piece of hardware, I think. They also made a good choice going with a Hall sensor design for the shifter's electronics element. Because there's no contact between the circuit board and the end of that locator shaft, it should give this unit a long life cycle. Moving down to the shifter gate. I like that it's all metal and has curved or beveled ends on the gate locator prongs. This made shifting between gears, well, quite easy. The design they came up with for switching from the H pattern mode and the sequential mode is quite clever, and it works without any issues. Being able to switch between different knobs for different shifter modes is also a great idea, even though I think the sequential lever is too light and causes the shifter to feel a bit vague, especially when coming from the H pattern shifter mode. I did try using the heavier round knob for sequential duties and thought it did bring some improvements to the shifter's feel. Overall, I think Fanatec did a good job on this shifter. If you're looking for an H pattern shifter, I would have no problem recommending you have a look at the Fanatec CSS. I'm Barry Rowland, and thanks again for watching the Sim Racing Garage channel.